What do you do when someone says, I'm demotivated, and the implication is, please fix that? What happens when motivation becomes your responsibility instead of theirs? Let's reframe this. There is no such thing as external motivation. There are external incentives, pressures, and consequences, but motivation is internally constructed. And when a follower makes their internal state your responsibility, that's not vulnerability. That's hostage taking. Here's why this matters. The moment motivation becomes externalized, the locus of control shifts from internal agency to external dependency. When people believe their performance depends on how inspired they feel, and that inspiration depends on you, their accountability dissolves. And the paradox is this: the more you try to inject motivation from the outside, the weaker intrinsic motivation becomes. Because autonomy, the core driver of intrinsic motivation, is replaced by expectation of emotional provision. That is not leadership. That is role distortion. The leader absorbs responsibility that does not belong to them. In a performance review, a team member says, I just don't feel motivated lately. You ask, what would help? And they respond, I need to feel more inspired. Notice the trap. Inspired is undefined, unmeasurable, and internally determined. You now become responsible for producing an emotional state you cannot verify. If performance doesn't improve, you failed. That's hostage logic. In another setting, deadlines begin to slip, energy drops, and you ask, what's happening? The answer, it's hard to stay motivated with this kind of workload. Translation, if I felt better, I would perform better. Responsibility is shifted upward. Agency moves away from the individual. And many managers, influenced by the message, leaders must motivate, accept this frame. They start over-explaining, over-encouraging, over-accommodating, redesigning endlessly. They feel supported. They feel empathetic. They feel needed. And performance still does not stabilize because you cannot regulate someone else's internal drive. Here's why this cannot work. Self-determination research is clear. Autonomy, competence, and relatedness support intrinsic motivation. But no leader can install motivation inside another adult. You can create conditions, you cannot create drive. When leaders attempt to own internal motivation of their team members, they absorb emotional responsibility. They weaken accountability. They increase dependency. Short-term feels relationally warm. Long-term creates fragility. That's when hostage dynamics emerge. Let's look at how this happens. There's 3 common mistakes. First, over-rescuing. You respond to I'm demotivated with what can I change? You immediately take ownership. Picture the dynamic. You leave the meeting thinking, I need to fix this. The employee leaves thinking, he will fix this. Dependency is reinforced. A better response would be, what specifically is blocking your performance? Shift from emotion to behavior, from feeling to action. Second, overfunctioning emotionally. You try to compensate with more inspiration, more speeches, more reassurance. You send articles. You redesign the vision. You schedule extra check-ins. It feels like leadership effort. But inspiration without ownership creates passivity. If I wait long enough, motivation will arrive. A better response would be asking, what part of this outcome is within your control right now? Agency must return to the individual. Third, avoiding accountability. You fear being perceived as unsupportive. So you soften standards. You delay difficult conversations. You say, I understand, take your time. But unclear standards increase anxiety, not motivation. And anxiety further reduces ownership. A better response would be saying, I can support you, but performance remains your responsibility. Support does not replace accountability. Let's look at how to extricate yourself if you are already in hostage dynamics. First, clarify ownership. Say calmly, I can help create conditions, but I cannot generate your motivation for you. This reestablishes adult-to-adult framing. Then, define outputs. Shift the discussion to what measurable outcome are we committing to? Motivation is subjective, but performance is observable. Anchor to behavior. Next, reintroduce choice. There are expectations attached to this role. You can choose how you respond. Choice restores autonomy. Autonomy restores intrinsic motivation. Finally, the fourth step, reset the agreement. Be explicit. The expectations of this role are A, B, and C. If these expectations no longer align with what you want, we need to discuss alignment honestly. This is not threat, it is clarity. When expectations are recontracted, hostage dynamics lose power, because both sides regain adult responsibility. There's an important clarification I want to make. This is not about dismissing emotional reality. People can be burned out, overloaded, misaligned. Let's be precise here. Burnout is structural. Misalignment is strategic. Demotivation framed as dependency becomes relational leverage. If you accept responsibility for regulating internal states, you create fragility. If you reinforce agency, you build adults. There's one important nuance here. Some younger professionals have grown up hearing, your leader must motivate you. But motivation has never been externally installable. What leaders can provide is clarity, fairness, respect, development. And what individuals must provide is effort, responsibility, meaning-making. When those boundaries blur, hostage dynamics appear. The paradox is that the more you try to motivate someone from the outside, the more you weaken their internal drive. And here's the paradox. The more you reinforce agency, the more motivation stabilizes. Leadership is not emotional provision. It is structural clarity. Now, reflect on this. Have you absorbed responsibility for someone else's internal state? Have you lowered standards to avoid discomfort? Have you confused support with emotional ownership? Motivation is not a service leaders provide. It is a response that individuals generate under the right conditions. You create the conditions, they create the drive. Keep those two roles clear. If this way of thinking is useful, the deeper analysis lives in the newsletter. That's where I examine leadership capacity at structural level. If you want the next breakdown, subscribe to this channel. And if this changes how you see motivation and leadership, share it with someone who leads. Rewire how you lead.